Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 217. Thank you for joining us. Today, my wife Maggie joins Bonnie and I to welcome back homeschooling father, You Mary Professor, and Canticle Productions founder and producer Daniel Bielinski to the Kolbecast. Last year, Daniel teamed up with Kolbe Academy to provide Kolbe families the opportunity to view his movie Sanctified. This event also helped to raise money for financial aid for Kolbe families that needed financial assistance. This year, he's providing us with the opportunity to view his movie End of the Rope, a movie about the last lynching that took place in North Dakota in 1931. Daniel walks us through the inspiration for the film and the process of producing a film based on an historical event. We discuss who the movie might be appropriate for and discuss some of the elements of the movie and the symbolism and the storytelling involved in certain elements. As an historical film, there are built-in spoilers, as it follows something that's already happened. But when we get into some of the twists and details of the movie itself, we'll give you a warning so that you can come back to that section after you've seen the movie, if that's what you'd like to do. If you're listening in during July and early August 2024, keep an eye out for an email advertising the watch event, which will be from August 9th through the 18th. We will begin advertising this event by the week of July 22nd. We'll also be hosting an event for Kolbe High School students to discuss the movie, led by our own Dr. Jordan Almanzar. Even if you're catching this podcast later, I think you'll enjoy hearing Daniel talk about the movie-making process, and this film in particular. Check the show notes for additional links, or visit endoftheropefilm.com for more information. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Kolbe homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and chief homeschooling officer for Kolbe Academy.
Hi, Stephen. How's the day treating you?
Day's going very well. Looking forward to our upcoming conversation here today.
Yeah, me too. And for that conversation, we have a returning Kolbecast guest, plus a friend of the Kolbecast, Maggie Hayden, your wife. Maggie, hello. It's good to see you. How have you been?
Been doing well. I also am looking forward to this. It's been a little while since I've been able to participate in a conversation, and this particular topic will be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I was looking back. It's been it was last summer when you were last on the Kolbecast discussing Latin with us in our language series. So that's too long. I'm glad you're back to fix that situation today. It's good to have you back visiting with us. We are also welcoming back a Kolbecast guest who joined us on episode 139, Glorifying God Through Film, Mr. Daniel Bielinski. Hello, welcome back to the Kolbecast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's great to see you again. We really appreciate the time you spent with us before on your previous episode, which we will link in our show notes. And you're back to tell us about your newest film that our Kolbe families will have the opportunity to view. So would you catch us up a bit? How have you been since we talked to you, and what are you up to?
Things have been going well. Things take a long time with film distribution. And so End of the Rope, which is the movie that we'll be talking about today, it's been keeping us busy. We've got 2 films that we're prepping for right now that we'll be filming this coming summer. My wife had a baby at the end of September. That's baby number 6. We're busy homeschooling. My kids have come to the studio almost every day and help me build sets and paint and do all sorts of things that need to be done. So they're getting a good homeschool education, I think.
For sure. And congratulations on your newest family member and your new studio. You were telling us before we started recording that you just moved into a new studio a few months ago. That's exciting. Yeah. Yeah,
thanks. Yeah, it's a long journey to make it functional and make it home. But, it's going.
So our Kolbe families will have the opportunity to view The End of the Rope from their homes as part of a fundraiser for Kolbe. Stephen, would you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, this kind of started out last year with Sanctified, which we were able, Daniel shared that with us so that we could provide that to our families, which was a great opportunity, a great time. And it just turned out that people were really interested in addition to exposing people to a Catholic filmmaker's movie that is worth watching. It's also a good opportunity for us to raise a little bit of money for our financial aid. And so it's a win-win proposition, I think, for everybody.
a neat idea. I'm grateful for your help in that. So your new film, The End of the Rope, would you tell us a bit about it, the inspiration for it, the story, it's and noteworthy bits from the production process? Tell us about it.
Sure. End of the Rope is based on a true story from North Dakota history. It's the last lynching in North Dakota. Happened in 1931 in Schaefer, North Dakota. So yeah, it's a heavy subject matter. It wasn't race related at all. It was white guys hanging a white guy. But the story starts with a family disappearing off of their farm and all their children as well. And their farmhand is left holding the farm. And he says they've gone to Oregon, and he makes up a variety of things. But they end up discovering that that family has disappeared, is not in Oregon, is nowhere. And so they bring the farmhand in for questioning. He has very suspicious and kind of sociopathic behavior. And they try to hold him. The law officers try to hold him, but the town rises up and takes matters into their own hands and storms the jail cell and brings him out and throws him off a bridge with a rope around his neck. And then afterwards, there's a big statewide investigation into who is responsible for this lynching, and nobody squealed. The whole community stood by, and nobody was ever brought to court. So it was a very very fascinating true crime story from North Dakota history that a lot of people who are alive now have a personal tie to. These are the great-grandchildren, or the grandchildren or great-grandchildren of the people who were actually involved in the events that night. So a lot of our supporters early on, they had those personal connections to the story and a real interest in telling it. There was a book written called End of the Rope, a short history that focused mostly on Charles Bannon, who was the farmhand, the murderer. And I met the lawyer who wrote that book, and I thought it was a very fascinating story. And he became a partner just in bringing it to life. And I brought my friend Charlie Griak as well. He wrote and directed the movie. And yeah, we shot it in summer of 2021, and then it ended up in theaters around the region in spring of 2023, and it'll be on streaming platforms for the world to see in summer of 2024. So yeah, it's been a journey with that film.
Wow, yeah. It's always amazing how lengthy the process is from idea to let's go see it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was fall of 2019 where I first encountered the story, where somebody just like sent me a message, hey, you should make a movie about this. And I thought, well, yeah, I think I will. It was interesting to adapt a story like End of the Rope. And like looking at the history book, that was it was my first question, like, so is this going to be a really dark movie about a sadistic killer who kills a family and then just lives on their farm? Like how dark are we going to get here? Because there's, I think true stories, you can't go wrong telling a true story, but it's how you tell it, because how the storytelling is handled that can really make the difference. So the first questions that I had is, oh, whose eyes are we telling this story through? And most of the book focused on Charles Bannon, the murderer. So it could have been that. It could have been this anti-hero story where we see this, we see the events through the eyes of the sick psychopathic killer. So it's like David Fincher kind of story, very cold and very twisted. But that was less interesting to me than seeing it through the eyes of a good person. And so we decided on telling the story through the eyes of the sheriff, who gets very little book time in the history books. But it was interesting to me to tell this difficult story through the eyes of a good man who's trying to do the right thing, just in a very difficult situation. And that to me was became the element that convinced me that it's a story worth telling.
So with little written about him, how do you go about crafting his character then? Do you draw upon the local folks for their reminiscences of him, or how they knew him, or how do you do that?
Yeah, there's a certain amount. You always do the initial historical research, and Dennis Johnson, who wrote the book, he was a tremendous help with that. He knew he had spent decades like interviewing people about the story, and so just about everything that needed to be known about the story, he knew, because he had talked to all these folks. But people would come up to me as well and just invite me over, and then like, hey, and then whisper in my ear something that their great grandfather had told to them that they'd never told anybody else, and stuff like that. So there was plenty of little tidbits that came our way during the writing process. But you need to. I always look at movies as not the final answer for a story. You can't look at a movie and say, this is going to exactly reproduce what happened in history, because it's absolutely an impossibility. As soon as you decide to make a movie, you start making creative decisions about what to include and what not to include, and what you need to expand on and what you need to diminish, because of the kind of story that you're telling. If we wanted to make a dark, twisted thriller through the eyes of Charles Bannon, it would have been a completely different movie. We could have made it an R-rated slasher horror film. Like that's how most people think of the movie when they hear about the Charles Bannon case. They're like, oh, that sounds like a really nasty story. But then they watch the movie. There's no violence that really takes place on the screen, or very very little. It's subdued. Most of the violence takes place off screen, and all the horrific events take place off the screen, and we just hear about it. So we didn't want to make something that was really graphic and upsetting, but something that asked some difficult questions, again, through the eyes of a good man who's trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. So in crafting the sheriff, I mean, we took lots of liberties with him and his wife. Like in the movie, he loses his daughters. That didn't happen to the sheriff. It happened to a different family. But we applied it to our sheriff to make it more meaningful. And every step of the way, we just had to keep our theme in mind. Like, what is the driving force? What are the messages that we're trying, or the questions that we're trying to ask as we tell this story? And then you have to, to a great extent, make the characters and the dialogue and the plot fit into that theme. I think I wouldn't have gotten into the story if I didn't have a ton of respect and appreciation for North Dakota history. I mean, so many of these films like 2 films that we're working on right now that we'll be shooting this summer, those are true North Dakota stories too. I have an immense appreciation for it. But movies are structured in a very specific way. There's Act 1, there's Act 2, and Act 3, and certain things have to happen in Act 1 and Act 2 and Act 3. At every moment, it's a very delicate balance that you need to maintain throughout the entire storytelling process. And it's much more rigid even than writing a novel, I think. So there's a lot of creative choices that need to be made, even as you're adapting a true story.
Well, Stephen and Maggie and their family had the opportunity to preview the film. I have not yet seen it, so I'll be playing the role of the parent who's considering the idea for family movie night. So Stephen and Maggie, you guys probably have lots more to ask him about and discuss.
Yeah, we get to be the guinea pigs, which was a great honor. So we got all of the kids that are home tonight. So we had kids, our youngest is 9 and our oldest is just turned 17 that's still at home. He's not our oldest child, but so we all gathered around and watched it, had a great time. Just the movie was really well done. We had the opportunity to watch it and then discuss it afterwards. So it was a really fun experience there. Now, as Daniel was saying, it's about a person who's killed many people, and there's some dark themes, a little bit of language in there. And as I was thinking, it was like, well, if my first one was here, I probably would have been concerned. But since we have, from almost 20 down to 9, the language was minimal. It's a little bit there, but there's some are So I'm trying to think about, okay, are our Kolbe families going to be comfortable with this? But the language there, I think, as Daniel, as you were saying, is I mean, it's probably the themes about somebody who's killed a family of people and a lynching that is probably the thing that you'd have to decide whether your children are going to be upset by that or if that's going to be upsetting. And that's depends on what they've been exposed to, and parents will know that.
Yeah, my 9-year-old did see it because he was in the movie. So my 9-year-old did see it, and my 11-year-old saw it, but I haven't let my 7-year-old see it. And if my 9-year-old had not been in it, I'm not sure. Yeah, like I said, there's nothing like really graphic and in your face about it, but I think there's something there's unsettling the topic, and ask some serious questions. Yeah.
Would you say a bit more than Daniel about your vetting process as a dad? You'd be kind of expand a bit on that part of what you just mentioned, kind of build from there.
Sure. Yeah. We're very touchy about any kind of sexual content in the movies, and think it's always good to have conversations with your kids so that they're not surprised by anything that they see from outside sources, but really just like having those important conversations between parent and child. But that said, I don't. We're very strict about what they see in terms of it. Yeah, any kind of sexual content, and so there's none of that in the movie. But it's a PG-13 rating. Like that's what it is, and so I'll never make a movie that's more, I think, violent or unsettling than what End of the Rope was. That said, the violence, just takes place off screen. I mean, there's some language in it. There's more than I would like. If I had to make it again, there would be none. So that's my learning curve as a filmmaker too. But I don't think that there's anything truly shocking in the language. And then it's just like there's a dark brooding atmosphere to the movie because of because it's working towards this end of lynching.
Yeah, it seems like that's just the sort of thing that, I mean, when you know what this movie is about, then as a father as well, you're thinking about would this be a good thing for my child to watch, to see, given their age and what they're comfortable with, what you've shown them in the past, because those are serious things to be thinking about. There's a lot of light I see in the parts of the movie. So you're not getting despair. You're not getting anything gratuitous, anything like that. It's all part of the storytelling, but some stories just aren't right for your child, given where they're at. So I think that's just the thing that as a parent, if you're considering that, you just have to, who's going to sit in the room while you're watching this? Or do you put a different movie on in the other room, or wait until the little ones are asleep or whatever? That's just something that with anything you ought to do. But again, as far as what you see and what you hear, it's not even a Hollywood PG-13 movie. It's very doable. At least I didn't feel like I had to protect my family at all.
Those scenes where you got to go like that in front of a child. It's about a man who commits murder, and then the entire town is very upset, and they confront him, and it's it can be upsetting to just see the consequences of those actions. I mean, it's an event. It's a movie, but it's also just a historical event that just asks a lot of questions, and so it could be a way to approach some of those serious questions. I mean, in the movie, I think any good work of art inspires questions and discussion. It's not something where you just watch it and then forget it. Yeah, I guess the question for parents would be like, yeah, do you want to have some serious discussions afterward?
Yeah, I just wanted to add there, that was one of the things that I thought was interesting. Having my 9-year-old was very puzzled as to just the idea of a lynching, even that idea of that being a way people exacted justice, or, was a topic that was a surprise to him. So he didn't have any trouble sleeping. He had no trouble watching it. But that was his question to me at the end. Why would people do that? I don't understand. That was for him, that was the one thing that I think and that was easy to address, but that was the thing that disturbed him.
Yeah. I mean, there was nothing that took place in the movie that wasn't grounded in some kind of historical reality. Yeah, lynching, especially in that time and place, was a real thing. It was still, in a lot of ways, the frontier of America. It was very isolated community. It was cut off on 3 sides by water, and so it was called at the time the Island Empire. And the nearest significant law was in Bismarck, which was 4 hours away. It's 4 hours away today. But back then it would have been days to get there. And so the community really felt like they had to take matters into their own hands to protect themselves. And they were justly angry for a good farmer and his wife and their kids being murdered. There was a just anger, but then how they acted on their anger, that's the disturbing part. I think there's something very human. It wasn't that they were all just got drunk and went down to the jail and sprung them out, and it was like just an act of drunkenness. It was stone cold sober decisions, that this is what's best for our families and this is what's best for our community. And not just again, like, these aren't just like the drunks in the bar, but these are like family men, fathers, who say, yeah, this is the thing that I think is right to do. But then on the other hand, there's the sheriff who's standing for law and order and justice and says, no, not under any circumstances is it right to do this. Even though he has strong personal feelings against the murderer who killed his dear friends, he's put in that situation where he's caught between the town that wants vengeance and the murderer whom he despises as well. And he has to stand up and try to do the right thing when everybody's against him. Even in his own home too. His own wife, his own marital relationship was in danger because of it. And so it asks moral questions, but I think like the kind of situation of a person being put in a situation that's not black and white. It's not very clear, like what is the right thing to do here. That's something that we can all that we all encounter on a daily basis, honestly, in today's culture.
So maybe spoiler alert going from here on out, I guess, for listeners. We might talk about just a couple of the things. If you don't want spoilers, then come back if you want to, if you're talking about some of these issues as well, I think maybe would be the thing. But Maggie, I know you had some questions about this. So
yeah, I had one thing that really struck me at the end of the movie when I was thinking about what characters did I see change in the movie. It's one of the things. I know it's telling a historical story, but I wondered about a couple of things. One is Charles Bannon himself. It seems like you actually maybe gave him, through the darkness, a moment of possible repentance and conversion when he is in the jail at the end, right before he goes out, because he gives himself when he sees them, beating up the sheriff, and he steps forward
Right.
So I wondered if that was something intentional. I mean, I ended up liking him better. And I almost ended up thinking at the end of the movie, which characters did I relate to? In a way, he's had such a rough life, and that was made very clear. And we experienced his mother and how horrible she is and his whole situation. It
Yeah.
seemed like in that moment, the goodness of the sheriff kind of moved him, perhaps to a moment, to something, to some kind of redemption.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we wanted there just to be a hint of that. I mean,
Mhm.
definitely, like that moment of um, intervening to save the sheriff from being beat up or even killed in that moment, sacrificing himself to the ruthlessness of the mob. It was something that we kind of agonized over at the time, like how sympathetic can we make him, like, and how vulnerable can we make this murderer without muddying the waters about him committing something, really horrific. He is guilty of what of a really horrific crime. We don't want to whitewash that. We don't want to gloss over that. We also want people to, um, to be aware without excusing him at all that, you know, that violence is a cycle that just keeps going, right? If there's like a theme of the movie, it's that violence begets violence. And so that's why the sheriff in the end refuses to turn in the town, because for better or for worse, he decides that this will just bring more and more violence into the community. And so his question of like what justice is challenged in that, in the final moments of the movie. I mean, there's no doubt that Charles Bannon had some kind of mental illness too, and so that's not an excuse for what he did. But um, the like we have actual like scribblings that he made when he was in the jail and stuff that he wrote, and like, this is not a person who is mentally well. And so there's, I mean, that's a factor. That's a factor. I mean, certainly at that time, mental illness was just beginning to be explored, scientifically and psychologically. So there would have been zero sympathy in a town for mental illness.
Yeah, yeah.
That's brought out in some aspects of the movie too, about like North Dakota not having a death penalty, and I guess the people of the town fearing that he's going to get out. Even if he is arrested, he's going to get off or he's going to get out, and they're not going to be protected. And here's somebody who's mentally ill, dangerous, and you can see their desire for protection, and it seems to be hinted at it, or at least are indicated that it might be justified that justice might not be given if you leave it to the courts. At least that's a perceived things. And
Yeah, I think, it was much more, we weren't trying to make any kind of statement about the death penalty with all that, but it was something that was a fear, I think, in the people back then, because it was more of the Wild West, and if it had gone to the capital city of Bismarck, for trial or something, that might as well have been New York City. And then they just feel like, well, anything could happen with those crooked politicians in Bismarck, and really fearing, especially because Charles Bannon had a track record of like disasters followed this guy. And we talked about like the fire burning in the
Right.
beginning, which was a historical event, again, not against the sheriff's family, but again, a different family. There was another event down in Kansas because he went down to Kansas after that, and then he came back. We didn't talk about that in the movie, but disasters really followed his heels. And when the family disappeared, people were like, "He's at it again." Like just boom, boom, boom. It's just like endless. We have to stop this. So you can understand the situation of the people in the town, which is represented by Jarvis, who's not a historical character, but he was kind of the rabble rouser in the town, and he had his own, drinking problems and anger problems. But what he has that discussion with the sheriff at the end, where you can understand where he's coming from. At least that was our intention. Again, not to excuse anything that he did, but to appreciate how delicate human emotions are, and how it's so, easy to fall into evil for every single one of them. Like, the darkness touches every single one of these characters in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, and speaking of that darkness, that was the other thing that we were wondering about at the end, is the decision to have the sheriff's wife. I think she's the one who actually pushes him off the bridge, right?
Yeah.
At the end, at least that's, it looked like it was her. And it's an interesting moment. That was the other moment we discussed a lot as a family, because he turns, he's going, they're telling him to jump, because it seems like nobody in that moment really wants to be the one to do the deed, to be the executioner. Everybody wants this justice that they've decided on, but nobody wants to do that deed. And he turns and he says, "Help me." And she pushes him off. We were discussing that. What was the thought behind having her do that? And what were the kind of understanding her character in that moment? Like, what's she doing?
Yeah. Historically, we don't know who pushed him off the bridge. And so that was a creative decision there in that moment. And C.A. Jacobson's wife, there's certainly no historical evidence of her being involved, although there is evidence that women were involved, and it wasn't just men. I think the idea behind having her do that, it just seemed like the right thing to do in the storytelling. They say that, when you're writing, you got to make your hero's life as difficult as possible. This whole time, he's been besieged on all sides, from the town, from his wife, from the murderer, from the lawyer. Everybody wants him to do things and bend his will to theirs. He's trying to do the right thing, and then when the deed is actually committed by the person who is closest to him, that makes it even more sad, makes it even more difficult for him. So what he's confronted with in the end for that final decision is like, do I turn in the town? Do I turn in my own wife for this? Or do I stop the violence now? I don't have a perfect answer to that, because in some ways, I feel like it could be interpreted that like the sheriff was that he was cowardly, or he made that decision to not turn anybody in because of his wife, because he's like, well, I'm not going to turn on my wife, and so I'm going to compromise because of that. Which wasn't my intention, but I don't think that necessarily needs to be the way that it's interpreted too.
Right.
It just seemed right for the story and for the situation the character was in, and then it leaves it open-ended, I think, in a way that people do want to talk about it, and they're like, well, why did he do that, or why did she do that, or like what would I do in that situation if like part of my own family was involved, as so many of the families up there were? What would I do?
I thought it presented a nice contrast, because here's their family was, like you said, were just so damaged by their farm being burned, their daughters dying, and you see this movement in him where he goes from hatred to, well, I'm going to do the right thing even though I kind of hate this guy still, to seeing yes, this is a guy who needs justice, but you almost, well, at least I thought that I was seeing in him that there was a resolution that didn't have to involve Bannon's death, that he could make steps forward with the revelation that Bannon says that he didn't kill the daughters, it was an accident. So he ends up getting beat up, getting trying to do that, whereas hers seems to be more of a, maybe justice is done, but I think you brought them together then after that to show they're moving forward together as a couple, where that it was strained very much in many of the in-between scenes. So even though it might not be, oh, we're happy and skipping through the meadows now or anything, but
Yeah. And like her character just suffering that whole time from the loss of her children and not being able to get past that grief and that anger, that righteous, anger of the children being taken away from her. Like, what is it like? And because, that's real too.
Yeah.
They say that most parents who lose children end up getting divorced. And so, it puts a strain on marriage to lose children for sure, because people process grief differently. She certainly processed it different. So in certain ways, she didn't change at all over the course of the movie. Like, the murder of Bannon was like the logical resolution of just her brooding anger. She was just like this and then pushed him off the bridge. But then at the end, like, what does that mean for her to help him build the house at the end, for them to like come together? Does that mean that she, like, something has snapped in her where she's able to feel some kind of repentance for what she did? Or, is she on the path to some kind of resolution for herself? And who knows, like, maybe, an onslaught of guilt regarding Bannon is in her future. But the feeling that, like, that he and she are together, at least at the end, is something that we wanted.
Yeah. And I almost wondered too, I noticed you had her wearing the like the scarf that her friend had given her. I think that was right. Maybe I was wrong about that, but I thought maybe it was she made her hood out of the scarf that she'd gotten from her friend before she died. And I thought, in a sense too, it might have been, here she is, she's the one who has, in a sense, she's sort of standing in for her friend who needs justice, who was asking for help from the sheriff, and because of the whole situation and the laws and how long it took them a long time to figure out what's going on. So that was a nice touch and added to the discussion. We're all discussing that.
And with the nice sort of the change in the people, the resolution from, again, bloodthirsty mob, hesitant to push, she's the one who actually pushes. And you see, even in the end, as he's going through with his broken arm and everything, I don't know, you could see a difference in the town people too. It was almost that they were spared that final push, that they're not a bloodthirsty mob, they're good people and they hated that this had to happen. And maybe there was some hoping that he's not going to turn them all in as well, but they didn't seem to be overly concerned with that. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seemed to help that too.
Yeah. I think, even Jarvis doesn't push at the end. He doesn't. You would have thought that, oh, he's going to be the one who throws him off the bridge, but he doesn't. He even backs down, or like doesn't have the guts, or doesn't have loses his nerve in that moment. And then, there's a kind of like resignation perhaps in the town at the end, where we're just like, we're not going to fight whatever happens. We're just going to accept it.
Good. I really thought it was really great for conversation. The visuals are great. The music is great. The acting is great. I thought it was a really well done movie, Daniel.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's good to visit with you again. I appreciate you taking the time to come and tell us about this one. Our Kolbe families can see it for themselves. There's a link in our show notes for them to be able to view it as a family. And we'd love to hear from our Kolbe families what kind of conversations they had afterward. And we'll be on the lookout for more to come from Canticle Productions, and wish you the very best and look forward to the next opportunity we can have to talk with you. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me.
And Maggie, so great to visit with you again. It's been too long, and so let's do something about that. We'll have you back here again real soon to talk about something else.
All right. Thank you. I look forward to it.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, holy saints and angels, pray for us. Ad maiorem Dei gloriam.